It's always a pleasure to have such an august gathering uh, to have this conversation on the budget proposals, and we look forward to a very insightful session today with the group that we have today. I have the pleasure of introducing the panel. We have Jatin Dalal from Wipro, who needs no introduction for the group. Uh, we have Chirag Patel, who's the advisor from Sports Village. He's also representing TAI Rajasthan as a mentor, and uh, has various interests in businesses and startups. We have Amit Srivastava, who is the CFO of Gupshup, uh, who's obviously going to give us very good insights on how he sees this budget going through. We have Shruti Kannan, who heads the Cisco Launchpad, uh, to look at the perspective of how incubators look at startups and what the budget has to offer from that perspective. We have Som Pal Chaudhary, who is a partner in Bharat Innovation Fund. We have Sandeep Khar, who's the director and head of portfolio finance from Sequoia Capital, looking after India and Southeast Asia. And obviously, Som and Sandeep will have a fair bit of insights from the investors' perspective on how they see the budget panning out for the tech and startup industry. We have Karthik Rao, who is the tax director Asia Pac for Accenture India, who obviously brings out the industry impact from a business and operations perspective and tax perspective on how the budget will play out. We have Fatima Hunaid, who's a chartered accountant and the leader for transfer pricing. We also have Raja Lahiri, who's the partner and technology sector leader for Grant Thornton Bharat. So
Thank you everyone for your patience on this, and we'd like to kick off the discussion with Jatin Dalal, who's also our keynote speaker. And Jatin, may I request you to share your overall impressions about the budget, on the growth-oriented, the CAPEX focused and other aspects that you'd like to share?
Sure, Fatima and Sridhar and Raja, thank you very much first for having me here. It's absolute delight and pleasure to be here in the company of people that I always admired and learned from. So, so let me start, with first with a little bit of context. I want to say it in. I want to share my thoughts in four bullets or four sections. One is the backdrop of this budget. Second is a broad impression about budget from economic standpoint. The third is the impact that we see on IT, and fourth, what could have been better in this budget. Let me start by talking about the environment. I think the environment, and when we started looking early January, there are three big variables on the scale, on the global scale, that will impact how 22 turns out. I think the first is of course the pandemic, and it's well known, so I wouldn't talk a lot about it. But the general expectation is that it is receding, and probably we will see a lot more of opening up from in couple of months from now on. The second is the US rate strengthening. I think that is one event that would impact the movement of funds, the movement of the prioritization of capital across the globe in a meaningful way. I think based on all that we have seen so far, most countries will lag the action. except UK, which has gone ahead. But we believe that monetary side, US will lead the charge on restoring back some cost of funds, restoring back some interest cost back to the corporations around the globe. And that is one variable which will have impact on whole lot of other flow through impact on the economy, on the markets and economies of the world. And the third factor is inflation, and I'm sure it is visible to all of you that inflation seems to have run up to the numbers that probably we would have not assumed to be tolerated in any of the large countries, or even emerging countries. And if that remains at the level at which it is, you would see that there would be either acceleration or deceleration to this strengthening cycle, and that could have impact again on the way the world will behave in next 12 months. So inflation, um, interest rate movements, and pandemic turnout was really the backdrop of this year's budget from our standpoint. There are two aspects. I will go to the second aspect of my conversation, which is around how do we characterize this budget. I think this budget, um, after seeing many types of budget, I think at least the way we see it internally, it's one of the most prudent budgets that in recent times. Uh, it is forward thinking, it is growth oriented, it is not populist. These are the words that come to our mind as we think about this budget. Why do I call it's a prudent budget? If you see the revised estimates for fiscal 21-22, you would find the lowest growth in taxation collection is 23%, which is in GST. Income tax is 26%, corporate tax is 38%. And what is the assumed revenue projection in the budgetary estimates for 23, and that is 13%. And I think it's significantly under scope, maybe purposefully, to retain the flexibility. I think if you go by the headline of 6.4%, it certainly looks slightly larger than what expectation was, around 6.1, 6.2. But what we believe that expectation would be is little bit already. If you read the notes, people are not taking that 6.4% fiscal deficit on its face value, and people believe that number is likely to be very a better number, maybe 6.1 or a lower number. So it's a prudent budget from that standpoint. There is no extra revenue projection which you think will not come through, including divestment proceeds and so on and so forth. On expenditure side, I think the excess that we had created during pandemic year, which was the food subsidy, has been significantly curtailed. Overall, across the board, you see subsidy has been reduced. Any numbers ranging from anywhere between 10% to 25%, and I think it's a very good step as economy grows and there are more and more avenues for individuals and families and businesses to be on their own feet. There should not be extra dependence on subsidy that was being done during the pandemic times. And it's, again, as I said, it's a prudent budget. Populist measure would have been to add something to it, or at least not reduce it, but they have taken that right call of calling off an intervention when it is no longer needed. Third thing is a huge emphasis on capex and infrastructure. Again, I'm sure many of my colleagues on this panel will talk about it, but it's really heartening. I think 7,50,000 crores is a big amount to be put in infrastructure, and it will create force multiplier of job creation. It will create force multiplier of ancillary industries, and so on and so forth. We believe that is also another step which is very very well done. We see that another big step on expenditure side is 25% of defense budget to be defense R&D budget to be opened up to the private enterprise in academia is also another big push that will come. There is an Atmanirbhar Bharat theme has continued. Domestic defense procurement is to be increased from 60 to 68% from 58%. That itself is another push to domestic manufacturing. So overall, if I look at purely from the way the budget has been drafted, it seems to be very prudent, very growth oriented, capex heavy, infrastructure spend heavy. And finally, in all modesty, they have mentioned that the overall GDP growth is likely to be 12.6%, which seems, even again, as from the word go, complete underestimation. And I think if everything goes well, we would be 13 and a half for sure, because inflation would be 5%, and I think 8.2 to 8.5% is given for FY23, no matter how you look at whoever is publishing an estimate. So overall, prudent and growth oriented budget. The third section which I wanted to talk about is around the overall emphasis for IT and startup, and I think we could not have asked for more. I don't think when Grant Thornton and Raja picked up this topic for talking today, they had any idea what was coming in the budget. But I can say that so maybe finance minister knew about this project or program and seemed to have catered to that. It's very digitally. I think there seems to be emphasis of digital in every sphere of activity, starting with the most expected lines, like rollout of 5G to digital currency, to usage of drones for agriculture, to host of schemes, and one can go on from digital banking to digital payments, e-passports, some of the digital ecosystem for skilling and livelihood, and so on and so forth. And there are many positive steps there, which just seems to indicate how strongly this government is keen to continue to make impact. And I think one of the things that they have also realized, looking at the pride with which Honorable FM spoke about GST collection in month of January, they've realized that the transformation of a nation like this can only happen through technology. And I think they have gone all out in every sphere to emphasize on digital and impact of IT that can be created in every sector. So as an IT company, we could not have been more we could not have been happier with an emphasis of the nation, like it has been mentioned in the current budget. Lastly, I will talk a little bit about a couple of things that could have been slightly better. Again, I don't know how this could have been slightly better, because it's a very tight line, and I could say if I was also advising somebody on this, maybe I would have taken the same path. But I think somewhere the borrowing seems still very elevated from what the expectation was. That will crowd out probably some private borrowings. And you've seen private borrowings, which used to be 3-4%, credit growth is up 9-10%. I think it can go to 15%. But I think there will be a little bit of crowding out there with 15 lakh crore of gross borrowing and 11 lakh crore of net borrowing. Second is, I think we believe from our standpoint that a little bit more push on maybe education and healthcare would have helped. There's certainly a push in the budget here, but maybe that those sectors could do a little more of attention. But again, I know that it's a tough job always. But they have not left it out, which is a little heartening. It is that they have taken 5 steps, and one would have liked to see 7 steps from what happened. And these are my observations. I think I've taken maybe a minute more than what I thought I would take. And I am keeping out direct tax proposal because I have people on the dais who are very wise and knowledgeable in that area, and I will add to their points. Thank you.
So no, thanks, Jatin, for that. I think you kind of laid it out pretty clearly that it's a very prudent budget, and thanks that yes, there was a digital and tech heavy in the finance minister's speech throughout the budget, and I think with that prudence, possibly we will turn to Karthik, right? Karthik of Accenture. And a very specific little deep dive into the tech sector. So Karthik, your impressions on the budget of the tech sector, hits and misses.
So thanks, Raja. I certainly echo what Jatin mentioned. I think, for the tech industry overall, from a business standpoint, I think the focus that the budget gives on on digitizing everything and continuing to work on that whole digital agenda, I think that presents a very solid domestic business opportunity as well for a lot of the tech companies. And even if I look at it from the perspective of how the industry has performed overall, during this pandemic phase, I think relatively the tech industry was one of the sectors which was quite, insulated from a lot of the, disruption that happened from COVID. Yes, we had to kind of pivot into a different way of working, and operational structures and all had to undergo a change. But overall, I think from a business standpoint, we were largely insulated, like I said. So, as an industry, we didn't, in all honesty, have, any expectations around getting some incentives or, any kind of other support as such. We were, our expectation was that things should largely be left untouched in terms of tax rates and things like that. No major tweaks, no major changes, which I think is what we have seen in the budget, which is good. I think in any case, with the way some of the international tax commentary and discussion is going on towards the OECD BEPS agenda, we will see a fair bit of change coming out in the next couple of years on how international taxation would work. Therefore, I think the fact that there wasn't much tweaking done in the budget on, on the tax legislation, I think is good, because in any case, we will see a paradigm shift coming about in the next 2 years or so. One of the areas where, we were hoping that there would be some bit of clarity is, this whole work from home or hybrid working environment that, the tech industry has had to kind of pivot towards during this pandemic. The current legislation, I think, still needs, to come out with a far bit more clarity on how to enable that entire operating model that the industry has kind of pivoted towards. And I don't see us going back, to a complete business as usual pre-pandemic model, even once things settle down. So we were hopeful that there would be some clarity that would come out on that front, but that's not come through. Instead, what what we've been told is that there will be a complete revamp of the SEZ legislation, and we'll see something new, which I think is good, because the current legislation, at least my view is that it's not equipped to kind of deal with this new environment that we are operating in. And with all the work that has happened through the Baba Kalyani report and things like that, I think if those recommendations and those valuable suggestions are incorporated into a new revamped legislation, that would certainly be helpful. So, from our side, the expectation is that that this new legislation comes in sooner rather than later, because we do need to plan for the operating model of the future. These stopgap arrangements of extending, these work from home relaxations and all of that by a few months, that adds to the element of uncertainty. On the tax side, I think one positive piece of amendment was to do with how the tax department manages its litigation today. I think currently most companies would kind of have witnessed or experienced this, where if they get any kind of positive outcome in a tax litigation, you would see the tax department continuing to appeal against that, and that typically results in many years of litigation getting lined up before courts, puts a lot of pressure on courts, taxpayers, the department. And I think the approach that was suggested by the government in this budget was a very sensible one, where they've basically committed that if there are matters which are similar in dispute, then they would not just go ahead and file the appeals. They would defer the filing of the appeals till such time as the issue has attained some kind of finality. And this proposal, I think, will dramatically reduce the number of appeals that are lined up in courts, and will hopefully result in more effective dispute resolution, which I think is one of the main asks from the industry insofar as we're concerned. So yeah, so that was a quick summary from my side, Raja, in terms of what at least I thought were the highlights insofar as the impact on the tech industry is concerned.
Yeah, no, thanks, Karthik. So overall, pretty positive. Tech has been doing phenomenally well, and you also touched upon the litigation part. So there is an intent to reduce litigation, and we'll come back on that. So going to Amit now. Amit, you've been in the thick of things, fundraising, acquisitions, and unicorn as well. Your views on the budget, but also any misses. Are we seeing some gaps? Lots of statements made, great intent, but are there some misses also in the budget? So over to you, Amit.
Thanks, Raja. And just to carry on from where Jatin and Karthik left, just one quick point, I think, which is important to highlight, is the whole ease of undoing business. For the startup that are being funded, I mean, they may go the M&A route, and there the budget's forward thinking on how they want to allow them to sort of M&A, shut down companies, restructure, reorganize, is very important. It's a big vision budget, and rightly said so. We will have to wait for the details. And for the tech industry, I think the tax holidays, the little bit of push on the education sector, which will fuel us with resources, is all heartening to see in the budget. So for us, it's an overall positive budget from the position that we are seeing it.
And Amit, any areas that you talked about execution, right? That there needs to be followed up with good execution. And one of the things that at least I've been thinking is a startup, huge mention, but as we know on the ground, the ease of doing business, the compliances continue to be pretty tough, the reality on the ground. Second, an area that a lot of people were hoping is on the listings, overseas listings, right? So there's so many unicorns in the system. Of course, the Indian IPO market is pretty strong, but as an option, right? People were hoping for listings. Any comments on that? Were you seeing some expectations around those?
Yeah, so we hoped to see some unlocking as far as listing is concerned, to be able to go and list in the international bourses. But I would like to believe that the whole gift city push that the government has had is sort of to counterbalance that expectations. We will have to see the details on the gift city push that is coming in, especially in the even in the budget. There are a couple of mentions around gift city. We will have to see how that plays out. But yeah, it would be good if we are allowed to sort of take the international route, because eventually it is a wealth and value creation for everybody. So you're right. This point has been definitely given a miss. We will have to wait for details from the finance ministry on these two specific issues.
So
That's
sure,
what
Amit.
the overall view is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think from your side, very clearly, great vision, execution needs to be followed up, and possibly the listing area. And maybe I now go to Sridhar, my colleague, tax partner Sridhar. Sridhar, from a tax perspective, right? What are the 2-3 key highlights that you have? And maybe I'll straight away get to the question everybody I'm sure has is on the digital currency, right? The digital rupee. I'm not talking about crypto here. I'm just restricting to virtual digital asset. That's what the wordings used by the finance minister. So walk us through that perspective, Sridhar, for us.
Sure, Raja. Thanks. So for the first time, I think India, the tax legislation's gone ahead of the policy on how the digital currency or the virtual digital asset in itself will be kind of positioned. So prior to the regulation around this, we see tax kind of also playing the front foot role, as we call it, to say whatever be the regulation, Government of India will certainly want to tax this as an asset class. So that actually sets the context for the regulation also in some way, that government is also veering to the fact that the currency is a sovereign function of the state, and therefore a private currency in that sense will not be encouraged and or dissuaded, certainly from a tax perspective. And we are seeing that coming through clearly in the tax policy of taxing such an asset at 30% without the ability to carry forward any loss of such asset and or to set off against any other profits from any other asset class. So in
Sridhar,
that
just to be clear, so this is a digital asset. So if you were to sell or transfer, there is a capital gains, right? Is that the kind of thinking directionally they are moving?
Yeah, so they have kept it distinct from a capital gain, but they have applied the principle to be taxation at the point of transfer. It's not taxed as capital gain in itself, but taxed on the profit that you generate from the transaction at 30%. So in that sense, distinguished from a capital asset and or an asset which is liable to capital gain in tax definitions, Raja. Yeah, and what it means is therefore that this is neither income from business nor clearly income from capital gains in classification, and a clear classification of a flat income tax and at 30%. Most likely as other income, which is what it was being positioned as even prior to this amendment, if we were to see the lack of clarity that was there. So the good part is there is clear direction from the government on how we would like to tax this asset class. Things to watch out for are that is government going to distinguish cryptocurrency as an sub-asset class as compared to other digital assets, which could be non-fungible tokens in themselves and or other digital assets. So that is a space to watch out for. But like India has been known for, we've put the tax policy around this upfront for everyone to debate and discuss. And maybe we are one of the few countries, I think US has something similar coming through, but one of the few countries which have taken a step to tax such an asset. Of course, it is limited to residents in its scope, and also the fact that we have also tried to tax this in the form of a withholding tax, like a TDS that applies on the transaction itself, and that is at 1%, which the purpose is to map all of the transactions that is happening. From an administration perspective, I think we need to see the fine print on how this will get administered, and probably that's why government has given time till July 2022 to actually implement this, because the infrastructure for individuals and payers of such transactions to do the compliance of TDS is a bit heavy on everyone. So we need to watch out for how that plays out on the ground from a TDS perspective. I think something that has come below the belt and which we did not kind of expect was the tax on the recipient as a gift of such an asset. So a virtual digital asset being received by a person could potentially also be taxed in his hands as a gift if it was lower than the fair market value. I think we'll be very keen to know how the fair market value is computed for this purpose, and that's something that will come out in the fine print again. So we need to kind of watch out for fine print on the valuation around this. Those would be the immediate take on digital currency itself. Some of the other kind of points that I'd like to bring out, I think that I completely reflect Karthik's perspective that they haven't touched any rates overall, and they've given a stable sense to tax policy in itself is a big positive for the industry as well as for players to understand the Indian tax legislation from a stability perspective. Like Karthik said, I think the concern on how the Special Economic Zone Act will get revamped is something that is good to kind of understand in fine print again. Purpose is to kind of improve utilization, especially for large industries and services sector players. And therefore, we would believe that this is significantly partnering with the state governments to make sure there's a lot of efficiency that gets built into export as a business in itself. And that revamp was needed. And we hope that that law in itself is also forward looking with ability to work from home, etc. The other element that kind of I'd like to touch upon is briefly on the tax holiday extension for startups. Again, a 1 year stretch for startups to get recognized till the end of 2023, till 31st March 2023, to be able to get the tax holiday of a 3-year in a 10-year block. That's a 1 year extension, and the logic is COVID and stress around that. We may have expected some more stability in that from the government if we were to push it from a startup perspective to see it a bit more long term, and maybe a 5-year window would have been a stretch that could have been considered. But this is also a good way to push for startups in these difficult times to kind of get registered and recognized by the government of India. And the last, I think, like what Amit said, the possibility to list directly overseas is an element which we would have wanted to see government play out in some form. But what we heard from the finance secretary in the conversation yesterday was that there were some tax issues around how non-residents would get taxed on such assets, and that kind of left it open for government to kind of debate with some key stakeholders around this. And I would think the PVC investor group the committee that gets set up for discussing friction around tax and policy matters may also pick this up on the ground from an investor's perspective as well. So broadly, that would be elements that I want to touch upon now. And Raja, back to you.
Well, thanks, Sridhar. I think you've covered a lot on the tax proposals. We obviously have the set of private equity VC investors as well as the founding community. So going to Chirag, to you now. Chirag, you've kind of seen the tech and the startup world very closely, right? And your thoughts, right? Is it something in line with what you were expecting on the startup, or is there something more that you would like to see?
Sure, thanks, Raja, for inviting me here. Look, I'll take a step back and sort of allow us to reflect on what's been happening over the last 10 years. And particularly in the last few years, I think there has been one recurring or resounding theme with a mega policy event like a budget in India. Firstly, there is keenness on the government side to remove obstacles for markets to function effectively. But at the same time, it is laying out guardrails and not stymieing growth and prosperity. Crypto or digital currency is an example of that. It is also inducing and enticing the market, the entrepreneurs particularly, for us to think out of the box. Our job is to remove friction and scale up. And I think that's a natural trait with entrepreneurs, isn't it? Particularly in a context like India. And I think the government recognizes that this will allow us to boost the economic growth further on back of what we have seen over the last 12, 18 months, and all its attendant benefits in terms of employment, tax revenues, FPIs, etc., which the experts talk about. So I think the picture, if I were to take a picture of what comes out yesterday, is that if we as entrepreneurs do our job in overcoming the friction and creating value, the greater the elbow room would be for the government and the policymakers to remove those obstacles and create a sort of a virtuous circle for startups to flourish. So that's my sort of big picture take here. Now, specifically, if you look at government's objectives in terms of removing obstacles, I think there are, and you touched upon it, Raja, I think there are two levers. One is incentives and the other is intent. I think the incentive is a tool which we have seen over the years is used depending on the political and the sort of the budgetary constraints of the year. We saw a lot of doses of incentives. And in this year, for example, we've seen some, for example, through exemption or also the fact that the government is accepting that startups do fail. A lot of them fail. And therefore, there's need for resolution, which also then spurs further risk-taking. I think it's an incentive we should not ignore. In terms of intent, we all run businesses. Most of the panels are heads of very large businesses. So we all have our strategy, our vision, and there's an execution. But all of this is missing if there's not enough communication. And I think the FM, through their script today, through her script yesterday, has positioned this budget and the intent very well. Look at I failed to count, but look at the time she mentioned digitization and startups in her script as well. So this is all a measure of good intent, I think. Sure. Also, if you think like the concept of setting up digital banks, this intent of taking digital connectivity across India is almost like what they've been trying to do of taking water and electricity to every home as well. This can create animal spirits. I think there's a tremendous opportunity which will come up, and over a period of time, we'll see what that happens. I also feel implicitly that the government is trying, through the startup sector, transgress across this MSME corporate sector. I think it can it can do many things across these sectors as well. So when I look at these two tools of incentives and intent, I think very prudently, as Jatin said, that they're used interchangeably. In some years you have flood of incentives, and in some years they demonstrate good intent. And this year for tech and startups is a case in point. Now many sectors and categories have been highlighted in this budget: education, agriculture, mental wellness, crypto, not crypto directly, drones. Look at all the policy statements over the last 10 years. There's a shift. And I think the tech sector and the startup community, which over the last 20 years has evolved also from being a pure service provider to now developing a host of innovative products ranging from deep tech to digital to powering analytics across industry verticals, pioneering with business models like SaaS. So there's a lot of stuff which the sector is doing, and we need to stay focused on removing friction and constraints as entrepreneurs. And I think, and almost sort of challenge the status quo. So our job is, I think there is a KRO for entrepreneurs in this budget.
Sure. Thanks, Chirag. I'm just conscious of time.
Yes.
Obviously, you've clearly laid down that
Yes.
there is a lot in there. You've been in the community, the energy and the spirit, the animal spirits which you defined clearly has taken off.
Yeah.
And in fact, Sanjeev Sanyal actually talked about that it's part of the entrepreneurs to get that going. I will, if it is okay, I'll move to investors.
Thank you.
Bring in Sandeep now. Sandeep, you've been the most, prolific investors in the startup ecosystem for many, many years. I won't say just restricted to last year or year before. Get us a view from the investor's perspective, right? I think a couple of things. One, private equity VCs have been mentioned, acknowledged, which is great. But there was a mention of an expert advisory group, which is also good. But there was nothing beyond that. So please walk us through from your investor lens. You deal with so many portfolio companies across tech. It'd be great to get your views now. You're on mute, Sandeep. Yeah.
Thanks, Raja, and glad to be here. I think a lot has been, covered by panelists who spoke about, how the budget is actually shaping the way the economy will or should evolve from here on. And I'll probably touch upon that as well in terms of how we think about it at Sequoia and me specifically as well. I think first to begin with, I think the overall sentiment, of the startup ecosystem is very positive from a budget standpoint. I think many are calling it a budget for digital India, thanks to the announcements, that have come out. Of course, a lot will emerge as we know. But the fact that, FM mentioned the word startup, I think about 10 times, digital about 20-25 times, clearly tell you that, the digital theme is being sincerely looked by the government, and they want to kind of make it very pervasive in the way we go around, doing business or conducting life as well. So nearly every sector is expected to receive digital impetus, driving further growth today. Digital initiatives that are planned across digital currency, the e-passport, the drones, the agri-tech initiatives. These are not incremental initiatives. I think these are transformational. And of course, this will require a massive amount of overhaul of the complete ecosystem. But, at least from our lens, we see that as significant opportunity, both direct and indirect. For all technology-led businesses, for business process improvements, and everything around that, I think will get impetus. So clearly, from that standpoint, we just feel that this is a very welcome budget. I think also on digital assets, I think the budget finally answers the very important question on what's government's view on digital assets. There is now a recognition that there is an asset. It also talks about, central bank digital currency being launched, essentially helping, improve digital payments, and Indians are getting digital savvy, right? We all know that crypto itself is about a 6 billion worth of investments happen from India. So it clearly tells you that India is adopting technology much faster than we ever imagined. So clearly, I'm going to repeat this, but I think there is huge amount of directional impetus given by the government in terms of how they want to, shape the economy and shape the future of all us Indians. With respect to this expert committee, Raja, I think it's a welcome and much needed step. There has been friction. We all know that. The fact that government recognizes the contribution and role of the PVC industry, and they feel that a platform like this should be set up, is, I think, forward looking, and I'm sure constructive dialogues will happen around a lot of things which this sector has been clamoring for. I mean, one of them has been, I think Amit from Gupshup spoke about listing. We all know how that can open up things for the economy. I think the industry has been asking for treatment of ESOPs, in unlisted companies. I think the government has recognized, the tax benefits for startups. I think this committee will probably help government think a little bit more deeply about how is the actual utilization on some of those benefits, right? I mean, there are 50,000-60,000 plus startups registered in India, but I don't know many take or avail any of the benefits. So what is that is needed around things like that? And again, crypto. I mean, while government has recognized that, I think the committee should or will definitely work with the government to bring these assets at par with other asset classes. And participate in government's vision to promote to growth, economic growth. So I mean, overall very positive. I think see adoption of technology becoming far more pervasive, and the right steps being taken.
No, great. I think Sandeep, you've covered a lot on that. Overall, very positive, right steps. And I think both you and Amit alluded to that the listing possibly could have been found a mention. I'll go to Shom now, right? Shom now, I don't know what's your thinking, but you are in deep tech, right? You're focused on deep tech, which in my view is really the pulse of the innovation, and to create that energy of innovation. But there's a lot of mention, right? Drones, agri, tech, fintech, digital currency, right? Do you see the trend towards innovation? Give us a picture from the ground, right? Are we really there from an innovation perspective, Sean?
Yeah, so Raja, and thanks to all the panelists. I'm not going to repeat many of these steps, but just to add on to your previous question. See, from an IBCA perspective, we have been pushing all of our ideas and thoughts over to the government. In fact, just the last week or the week before, we had a closed door discussion with Minister Piyush Goyal and so forth. So this is more of, as my previous panelist mentioned, I think this is an acknowledgement of the fact that the startup ecosystem, the investor ecosystem has arrived in India, and creating that expert committee and so forth. But there are many items under the belt. Still, I would have expected to see many items that we have been talking about it and so forth. Some resolution, and hopefully that communication between the expert committee and the government will facilitate that. Now, coming back to your specific questions, yes. So overall, frankly speaking, it's a digital and infrastructure budget, right? So every aspect, be it kind of the India stack, like the open source mobility stack, the Kisan drones, highlighting that NABARD is going to play a bigger role, the skilling stack, the health tech ecosystem, even the urban mobility, the standardization of battery swapping, land records, these will give a fantastic impetus. But if you ask me, the finance minister has highlighted some of these frontier tech technologies as well, right? So she talks about deep tech, she talks about AI, all of these elements. And there's a passing reference that some thematic funds and so forth will be created by SIDBI and so forth.
That's great.
So that's all good. So on one hand, being very close to that ecosystem, we see a lot of push, say even the quantum push and so forth is happening at the academia side. And now I think a good amount of resources, investments are being thought about on the thematic fund side, but there's still a gap. So I think what India needs is more of an NSF grants, DARPA grants, right? Which are so active in US. It's a consortium of academia, consortium of industries, startups kind of coming together, right? And to a certain extent, we could probably get some insights from what Bharat has done through their big grant initiatives, right? See, for the past 10, 12 years, Bharat has done a phenomenal job on the agri-tech side, biotech side, and so forth. So that probably needs to be replicated more in a mission mode. And we are not talking about AI. We are talking about clean tech sequestering technologies, recyclable technologies, quantum computing, space tech. All of these need to be taken up in a mission mode right now for real innovation to come. So yes, we are doing kind of piecemeal here and there, some academia research, some creation of the thematic funds, but that gap needs to be closed. That's my initial thoughts.
Right. No, I think very well said, Shom. I think, clearly there is a gap which needs to be plugged in. And, funds like yours, which is so focused on the deep tech ecosystem, I'm sure will encourage that impetus. I'll move to Shruti. Shruti, from Cisco Launchpad. Shruti, you've been involved again very intimately with the startup ecosystem, the innovation, the innovators, right, to really make the startup really start up. Your thoughts, Shruti?
So, Raja, coming from the creator space, so we are, part of the creator community. So, I definitely think this is fantastic from 1,000-foot level. So, we'll definitely have to see from the execution and the specifics how this really pans out. All of these big policy implementation. So just said, I think we've seen a huge digital and an infrastructure budget. But a good thing to also note here is, they are moving from a CapEx to an OpEx model, especially with this drone as a service and energy as a service. So the drone market in India is expected to reach about $1.81 billion by 2026. And we are seeing that the pandemic has really opened a lot of opportunities, newer use cases for this sector, like sanitization, announcement making, and even medicine delivery. Similarly, in the energy space, we are seeing that globally, $14.3 billion is the investment in the energy as a service model. So all of this is really leading us to a direction where we are seeing the infrastructure or the governmental provisions are helping the creators create better. I just want to get back to a little bit of nostalgia here. We had the electronic voting machine, which was conceptualized in 1979. It was used for the very first time in the general election of Kerala in the year 1982, May. But that election was actually, turned down, saying that it was not legal for usage back then. And it was later in 1998 that the electronic voting machine came into actual use in 25 legislative assembly elections. So this has taken, over a decade for an innovation to actually materialize and come into, real world. I don't think we can afford such a long gap between ideation to actual impact in this scenario that we are in. So from that perspective, I think the government's direction of specifically, the API ecosystem and as a service ecosystem are providing for three conditions for us, which are helping. One is the conditions to create, so which is the impetus to infrastructure and transparency that is specifically being brought out. we have provisions like, payment of 75% of running bills mandatorily within 10 days. I think this is going to put a lot of funds back into the startup creators' hands to get them into the creator mode. The second one is the conditions to establish trust. That is very, very important for the startup to get growing from their creation aspect. So that is, a huge space that government is now willing to join hands with the corporate, with the academia, and the opening up of the ULIP, which is the Unified Logistics Interface Platform, along with the Open Network for Digital Commerce. I think all of these are helping up the trust component. And the third one, which is the conditions to grow. So the creation, trust establishment, and growth. All these three pillars are now seen in tandem rather than in silos. And I think this is a very, very important trajectory for us, specifically for the startups, not only to create only in the core areas of their expertise, but we're also seeing, this will not only spur AI and semiconductors and space economy, but the allied areas like, say, safety. What about customer experience? All of this is contributing to the increased quality of living for the citizens. And, the specific mentions of circular economy and carbon neutral economy, this is probably, we are hearing these terminologies for the first time in a budget. And this is extremely progressive in that sense that we are not only thinking about creating, but we're also thinking about sustainability in the longer run. And I see this as an opportunity for the startups to strike it big in the sustainability segment and see how technology can act as a vehicle to enable inclusion through innovation. So that would be the underlining observation from my side, is to see how technology acting as a vehicle for enabling inclusion with innovation as the prime driver.
A great point, Shruti. Thanks for that. Sustainable looks to be a big opportunity for startups to focus on. Just conscious of time, I think we'll run by another 10 minutes. I'll come to Fatima now pretty quickly. Fatima, overall comment on transfer pricing, right? Tech, there is a fair bit of implications on transfer pricing and litigations, especially for the larger tech players, the global captives, for example. Do you see that kind of trend tapering down, or what's your view on that?
Right. Raja, multinationals doing business in India, transfer pricing and litigation all go hand in hand. And I see the trend continuing in the same trajectory, which is upward. But there's a lot of opportunity to segregate meaningful litigation from standardized ones and, kind of taper out the standardized issues. And to that extent, tech industry holds a lot of opportunity to do that. And I would like to congratulate the government to come in at the right point of the litigation pyramid, which is when litigation flows from the tribunal level, which is the final fact-finding authority, to the higher levels of High Court and Supreme Court. And that is where the government has put out a provision to pause the litigation. Now, whether the tax demands also will be paused, and how will the question of law, the point is the department should not litigate on the same question of law. India is a large country and several courts fielding appeals from several taxpayers and department. So how will, on a standardized pan-India basis, the question of law be available so that subsequent appeals are really paused? So on a practical level, yes, there will be interpretations and definitions to be seen, but a great move from the government. I think the tech sector holds a lot of promise in terms of providing clarity and certainty and creating and building further on the climate of trust. And I believe it can be done on two significant prongs. One is advancing self-governance in transfer pricing compliances rather than annual repeat documentation year after year. The other is on really infusing a lot of energy on the current dispute resolution mechanisms, which is the advanced pricing agreement and the safe harbor provisions. There's an opportunity to reimagine both of them and really fast track, because the issues in the tech industry are pretty much handled on a standardized basis by the government. Most of the companies are clubbed between IT or IT-enabled services, and the threshold expectations on margins from both these categories of companies are more or less, stabilized on the government point of view. But there's a big dichotomy in terms of what the advanced pricing agreement team of the government would agree at, and the administrative officers at the transfer pricing audit level, which is the beginning of the litigation funnel. So that is where, advanced pricing agreements, for example, if they could fast track the whole procedure and close it within a year, because more or less, no matter what niche of the multinational corporation, they are going to be visited with the same range of profitability markups. So that's one suggestion and one expectation. I think it's a real expectation. Currently, to share, there are cases where the entire future 5-year period is also completed and still the company has not been able to resolve the agreement which was supposed to be advanced pricing agreement. On the safe harbor front, I think this can be a really potent tool to provide certainty to the multinational corporations in the tech sector. How? By removing the upper turnover limit. Currently, up to 200 crore, there's a threshold margin expectation of up to 18% on profitability, but only up to 200 crores. So if this turnover threshold were to be removed completely, doesn't matter, because there's no need to segregate between small and big corporations here. The profitability expected is on par. So that, and therefore rationalizing the percentages. Many companies are not willing to put in those additional 300 basis points on the table just to buy certainty, because it doesn't make a prudent business sense, Raja. So I feel if the government puts a spotlight on these world-class dispute resolution mechanisms on transfer pricing front, a big part of the corporate tax issue, which tends to be transfer pricing and therefore the litigation, can create a lot of space for future discussion and litigation, which is bound to happen from newer base erosion and profit shifting based rules, which will come into the picture, and courts will need to be freed up to really find and settle these newer tax issues. So those are my comments, Raja.
Sure. No, thanks, Fatima. I think there are lots of recommendations over there, but I guess the mood is pretty clear, is to reduce litigation. So I'll come to you, Jatin, finally. We started with you, right? You've obviously heard everybody saying, as you started, it's a prudent budget, capex driven. IT digital seems to be very happy because the sector is doing very well. But there was also comments around great intent, but there are lots of execution that needs to get done. Very clearly, I view that the direct overseas listing, Jatin, there's so many few companies of India which are global scale, and listed in the United States capital markets. Definitely, that's a vision that at least I would have for many IT companies. So definitely, that's in my view a miss. But final closing comments from you, Jatin.
So Raja, I feel I'm more optimistic as I see some of this. I think there is a clear intent to resolve and take right step without really making big incremental steps where there could be a question as to it would be misused. You'd swing too much on the right or left, as the case may be. And clearly some of the misses, and you mentioned about overseas listing, I think there were some expectations around encouraging more debt fund investors into the country. Even that expectation has not come through in the budget. But as I started to say, I'm optimistic. I think there seems to be an approach to study, look at what will work, what will not work in Indian context, and take a step forward. So I'm sure some of this, which seem to be a miss in the budget, will come through in any other way possible between two budgets or potentially in second budget. So I'm quite optimistic to
Sure.
summarize.
No, I think with that optimistic note, I just want to say thank you everybody for listening in. Thank you very, very much, all the panelists and the speakers for your time.